At what age did you realize you were different? I realized I was different at about the age 5 or 6 years old. And this was the first time that I was referred to as the N word, hard ER, in my lifetime. And this would become the first, um, but not the last time that I would hear this word. And growing up in this community, I would hear this word an infinite number of times. And I realized growing up that I had to be prepared to hear this word at any time, any place, by anybody, either strangers, adults, and children. And this would be the community where I heard the N word hard ER the most in my life. And as I said, the first time I heard it was about 5 or 6 years old. And I think it's important in referring to the N word for me not to actually say the N word, to not be re traumatized, either to myself or to anybody watching, but also because I want to make a point that this was the N word hard ER on the end of it. That's the N word I'm referring to. And the first time that I heard the word, it was said to me by a white boy who was about himself 5 or 6 years old. And he was in some kids. I was in my neighborhood, the neighborhood that I grew up in. And he saw me. I don't know who the boy was. And at my age at that time, I didn't know who he was. And I can recall him. I was outside of my house in the street just playing. And I can recall him saying, "Hey, look, there's an N word, hard ER." And he was with a couple other kids, and he just could not stop pointing me out. And he repeated, "Hey, look, there's an N word, hard ER." And I can recall at that age him saying that that's what his parents call me. My parents said that that's an N word. So I can remember him saying it, and then I can remember him saying that his parents also call people like me that word. And that was the first time, again, I would ever hear that word. And certainly, this is just one of many memories that sticks with me throughout not just my childhood, but into my adult years as well. Um, Where could I hear it? I could hear it at the stores. I could hear it at school. I went to elementary, junior high, and high school in my community. I could hear it by classmates. I could hear it by peers. I could hear it walking home from school, um, by anybody. And I can certainly hear it from white supremacists that were in our community. Um, in the 80s and 90s in East Mesa, where I lived, there was a growing population of neo Nazis and white supremacists and skinheads. So that was absolutely a demographic that I had to live in the expectation of hearing racial slurs and of having my life threatened, or of having my family's life threatened, or of being reminded of how much they hate Black people. And certainly there were skinheads and neo Nazis that would pass by our house or the cul-de-sac and would see my parents outside. And so they knew that my parents were interracially married. And certainly my family had to have the expectation of sort of being prepared to receive this kind of attention, racist attention, discriminatory attention. I could also receive discriminatory attention or exploitation by teachers that I went to school with. Certainly, and I'll talk about that in this video, but certainly in junior high and high school, I would be treated differently and would be asked to answer certain types of racial questions, and certain types of provide information because of my race, or because the teachers believed that I had to Black parents or the teachers, regardless of who my parents were, um, would make sure to call me out and make sure to let me know that they're watching me in my classes. Let me talk a little bit about white supremacists. I know the peers I grew up with in East Mesa did not have to identify white supremacists out in a crowd, in a group, or a small group, or in the neighborhood. These weren't people they had to live in fear of, and these weren't people that cared about the existence of these kinds of hate groups. And I, growing up as a child, learned very quickly to be able to identify skinheads, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis based on a lot of things, what they're wearing, how, what they're saying, tattoos, any kind of insignia, saluting. Let me go through the list. So in my neighborhood, in my community, as I said previously, there was a growing population of white supremacists. So this included skinheads, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, white purists, people that belong to the Aryan Brotherhood, white supremacists, and the types of markings or tattoos, let's say, that I had to become very familiar with growing up so that I could stay clear from these kinds of people, because I certainly was not surrounded by people that would help me or protect me. I did not and knew I wouldn't be safe with any of the white friends that I knew. They wouldn't know what to do or care. I never felt that they would step in and help me out. So I had to get very used to quickly identifying tattoos or markings and then leaving and moving very quickly out of that vicinity. So I had to get used to Nazi phrasing, the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag is beloved by a lot of people in East Mesa growing up and even now. These are people who, again, this is why I'm saying I would not feel safe with these people if there were a situation with a skinhead and myself. I've been in those situations, but typically not with a group and by myself and having to run or get away quickly somehow. Confederate flags, swastikas, the numbers 88, SS bolts, the letters WP, some ode to Hitler, Nazi eagles, and Nazi party insignia. I also had to get used to seeing hand salutes. That could be very, very common, or Nazi salutes. In terms of clothes, Confederate flag everything, Confederate flag suspenders, shirts, jackets, poster, the flag up, a poster of the Confederate flag, Confederate flag everything, pinned denim jeans, steel-toed boots. Very often I could hear white power punk music, music played very loudly. This could also be by cars driving by my parents' house, playing the music, and usually involves words. How would you know that it's racist punk rock music? Because there's words that rhyme with trigger in the songs. So that's how I would know, because the words are in the songs. So let me talk a little bit about teachers. So one of my first occurrences that I can recall, and it has always stuck with me more than most of the others, took place in about 8th grade, junior high. And this was kind of the first time I really felt like teachers can abuse their power. And So this was in a government class, and I remember being asked by this teacher, and this would happen on quite a few occasions. And this was in the very early 90s, back when um, there was Anita Hill versus Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. This was in, like I said, the early 90s. I would be about 12 or 13 at the time that this case was going on. And at 12 or 13, I didn't know very much about Anita Hill bringing to the public arena accusations of sexual harassment towards Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, which is the position he was in at that time. So during that time, and there, absolutely, it was in the news, it was around, a lot of adults were paying attention to it. My parents, I imagine, were paying attention to it, but this was not information that they were talking with me about the case. This was a case that involved accusations, and the accusations included descriptions of sex in vivid detail. And in breaking down the descriptions of sex in vivid detail, these accusations included discussions of pornography, group sex, talks about breasts and pubic hair, and rape scenes. And so that's what was going on in the accusations at that time. Again, I'm 12 or 13. I've got ballet class to go to. I've got church to go to. I've got homework that I have to do. I've got jazz class to go to. So I have things that as a 12 and 13-year-old girl, I'm doing. I'm not sitting with my parents at a table talking about these sexual harassment accusations. So I remember being in government class, and this is all going on. And I remember my government teacher saying, you know what, Tina, and this was just in the middle of class, Tina, I'd like you to stand up, and I want you to tell the class, there's a very important case going on right now, Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas, and I want you to stand up and tell the class what your parents think about this case. I want you to give the class the Black perspective. I'm curious about what Black people think about this case. And if you're unfamiliar, Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas are both African-American individuals. And so I remember being at my desk, and immediately the anxiety hits, and my heart's beating very quickly. And I remember kind of fumbling my words. I didn't really know what she was asking me to say, and I didn't really know much about this case. And again, I'm about 12 or 13. And so I kind of fumbled my words, and she said, no, Tina, I asked you to stand up. I need you to stand up in the class. I need you to tell everybody, what do Black people think about this issue? And I remember explaining to her, the only words that I could really put together were telling her that I didn't know what she meant about Black perspective. And then I had to go into this, and she's confused, looking at me confused. And I remember having to explain to her that, well, my mom is from Jamaica and my dad is white. It's just like a pre-recorded message. And I don't really know what they talk about. They don't talk to me about this. And she asked me again. It was like, what I just said didn't make any sense. What she's saying isn't making much sense to me. And so she had me, no, Tina, I just want to know what your parents are saying. What are they talking about? Tell us what Black people are thinking. I just remember she kept saying that. So eventually we were at an impasse, and she had me sit down, and she was disappointed. And then I remember, because this case was going on for quite a while, and this would happen about 2 or 3 more times, where I had to be asked to stand up. It was like she didn't hear me the last time. I realize now in retrospect, she was never going to hear me. And so, yeah, that is certainly where I had to start to learn very quickly that at any point I could be called out in any class and I would have to share, I would be asked anything about my background, my family's background, their perceived background, and that I would have to be ready for that. Now, when it got to probably ninth grade and on up to high school, I can very much recall several teachers that would, at the first day of class, when they're calling roll, and my last name is high up in the alphabet. And so I was typically ready to say I'm here in attendance. But I can recall once it would get to my name that some teachers, they would read it, look up and see me, and then their face would change. And then they would let me know, now, Tina, we're not going to have any problems in this class, are we? We're not going to have any issues. I've had some teachers go as far as to say, I hope you don't plan on saying too much. And we're not going to have any problems, are we? And so I would get that quite often in classes. It's that upfront warning that I'm going to need to keep myself in some sort of perceived line. Otherwise, there's going to be problems and it's not going to be good on my end. And knowing that my name is being called first in class, I was paying attention to the rest of the students being called, and I never heard any other exchange like the one I would get. Many of these teachers were also Mormon. I know this because they would talk about their religion, talk about informal conversation with other students or formal in-class conversations about the religion, but would certainly easily disclose what their religious background is. So yes, overall, I could receive and did receive racist treatment, exploitation, discrimination from anybody, religious, non-religious, Mormon, not Mormon, teachers, store clerks, restaurants. I mean, it could just happen at any time. In high school, and I want to say that not only, I don't want to speak for the LGBTQIA community, but in high school, I knew individuals, I mean, at that time, we didn't have all of those significant letters. And, but I knew people that would identify with that population. And these were the individuals I knew were individuals that verbally shared with me their fears of coming out in high school. So I didn't know anybody that came out in high school, at my high school. This wasn't a community that I knew, they knew, was safe for someone like myself or also individuals that belong to the community, LGBTQIA plus community. So I just want to bring attention that was not just me and the demographic that I belong to, but there are other peers that I went to school that had to live in a level of fear and anxiety as well. But for me in high school, I could be called the N-word in passing. And that's what I mean, that it could happen at any time. It doesn't have to be targeted by a neo-Nazi or a skinhead. And it doesn't have to be when I'm at the store with my family and someone's saying that as we're walking to the car. It could be in passing in my high school, in the hallways, inside or outside of the campus, where people are going by and someone says it to me and I don't know who it came from because they're gone. It's groups. So I had to be prepared to hear that. And then I was a part of the spirit line. I was a Pommy in high school, varsity Pommy. And in my palm line, I could hear the word when we're done performing a routine or a halftime and I'm walking by the bleachers, or if varsity spirit, our pommies, we had to perform not only at varsity football games, but varsity basketball games. And we did sideline and we did halftime entertainment. And so I could hear it at basketball games from the bleachers walking off the court, and I could hear it at football games cheering on the track. Touchdown scored, I'm cheering. And if we're walking off to get ready for halftime, I could hear that walking off. So infinite number of times I would hear racial slurs growing up in this community. And so, yeah, overall, growing up in this community was far from easy. And my life definitely went down a trajectory starting at 5 or 6, the first time that I heard the N-word hard ER. But I think this is good for now. And stay tuned for my next video, where in that video, I'm going to talk about the demographics of the schools I went to.